So this is a tutorial on storyboarding for animated character performance. So we have a sound clip here. This is from Iron Man, and it's Tony Stark.
They say the best weapon is one you never have to fire. I respectfully disagree. I prefer the weapon you only have to fire once. That's how Dad did it. That's how America does it. And it's worked out pretty well so far.
I chose this dialogue because he has a lot of emphasis on particular words, and there's a nice pause in there to get the character thinking. So that's just the choice I made for this tutorial. But whatever audio you choose for your animation, you definitely want to approach it in this way. We're going to show you how to break up the dialogue a little bit and just some ideas on how you compose your character and why you would do it that way. Once you have your audio chosen, you do want to listen to it and think about how you want the character to perform. Now, a lot of people like to look at the movie or TV show or wherever they got the animated clip from. Definitely do not look at that. Don't use it as reference, because the idea here is to come up with your own acting choices. You don't want to animate to a live action actor. You want to come up with your own acting choices for the dialogue that you chose. Put your own spin on it, basically. Basically, you want to break up the dialogue into chunks. Those chunks are going to be when your character changes their poses.
They say the best weapon is one you never have to fire.
They say the best weapon is one you never have to fire. So I'm going to put that in one panel. I'm just using Photoshop here to do this. You can use GIMP, which is a free photo editing software. You can do this in that software, and you can also just do it in Microsoft Paint if you don't have those softwares. I'm also using a tablet to do the drawing. You can print out a storyboard template and just draw it with a pencil, and that's fine too. So I'm going to use, in Photoshop here, I'm going to use the text tool just to type in the dialogue, just so you know what text is going with what poses. Alright, so I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm just going to Control T and scale it down. I'm just going to move this over here. We're going to put our initial pose here, the starting pose for our character, and again, we're planning animation here, so we want to make sure that we're doing it with an animation mindset. Okay, so before you start doing your drawings, you want to definitely create a new layer, and I'm just going to call this panel 1. I'm going to create a new layer for each panel just in case I want to edit them separately. Now, if you're looking into becoming a professional storyboard artist, normally they use Toon Boom Storyboard, but if you're a student and you don't have that software, you can certainly use Photoshop. I'm going to go to my brush tool, we're just going to hit B on the keyboard so I can start drawing. For our first panel, we're just going to have our character standing in a neutral pose. I'm going to go with a full body shot just to demonstrate line of action. Now I'm thinking when he says they, in the audio file that we have, it's very pronounced.
They say the best.
I'm thinking I'm going to pose him on that word when he says they. So I'm going to have him probably lean back and sort of gesture out to whoever they is. So in the first pose, I'm going to use a C-curve that's opposite of the one I want to go into later. So we'll just have him in sort of a relaxed position. Alright, so I'm actually going to move this dialogue over because I want to have him anticipate before he goes into the word they. I'm just going to do my line of action first, just so I know the general pose that I want him to be in. It's nice to do the tilt of the shoulders and tilt of the hips. Alright, so we're going to have him shoot his hand out on the word they. You want to have the character go into their most extreme poses on the vowel of the dialogue, so have him hit this pose right on the word they. So before we do that, we're going to have him go from his initial pose into more of an anticipation pose. So I'll just rename this one panel 3, and we'll do a panel 2. And let's anticipate this pose, so we'll go into something a little more crunched down. We want the head to come down. We're going to have him take a little bit of a step here, and we can anticipate the arm. If you're a student, you can easily just get by with these impressionistic drawings just to get an impression of what the character is going to do, just to plan it out for yourself. And I can't stress how important planning is. He's crouching down into an antic, and you could even put little notes here. Antic, and then key pose. When you actually go to animate in the software later on, this storyboard is going to serve as a blueprint for you. It just takes out a lot of the guesswork when you start to animate. You're basically doing all the planning at this stage. I want to add another storyboard sheet to this, so I'm going to go up to Image. I'll go down to Canvas Size. I want to increase our canvas size down, so I'm going to click here where the anchor is at the top, and let's go with pixels, and I'm just going to change the height to something really big. We'll just go like 3000, so it just gives us more space below. Then you can import another storyboard panel. We'll just bring it down below the other one. Okay, so let's create a new layer for panel 4, and it's good to number these two. You just give them a quick number.
They say the best weapon is one you never have to fire. I respectfully disagree. I prefer.
Okay, so the next chunk is I respectfully disagree. So I would put that on its own in its own panel because he pauses there. So let's go to our text tool, make sure we're on panel 4, and we'll just type in I respectfully disagree. So I think I might have him change his pose on that piece of dialogue. So we're just breaking it up into chunks of dialogue where he changes his posing. He's saying I respectfully disagree, so I want to have him sort of gesture to himself. So we'll have him gesture in toward his chest. Now if we look at the previous pose, he's sort of in a C curve back. So we can get him into an opposing C curve. So it's nice to have variation in your posing. Make sure we're on panel 4. And let's come up with a pose for when he says I respectfully disagree. Now I think he would go, because of the way he says it, he emphasizes respectfully, the E in respectful. It's good to underline it. It's always good to draw with the head first, and then we'll get our line of action. The biggest part of this piece of acting is him gesturing to himself. So I'm just sort of going to emphasize that in the drawing. The other arm's just sort of sitting idle. We'll create a new layer for panel 5, and we'll listen to our audio again.
I respectfully disagree. I prefer the weapon you only have to fire
once. Now I think we can accent and keep him in this pose. This is just the thought process I would go through. And the way he says once, I would say that would definitely be because he really emphasizes the word once. I would definitely get him into a big pose for that, right? So that's probably going to be over here or maybe on the next panel because we'll have him anticipate. Because it's a heavily emphasized word, it's going to be more of an extreme pose for the acting, so we'll have him anticipate that really well.
I prefer the weapon you only have to fire once.
Okay, so that's how we're going to break this part up. For this panel, there is an emphasis on the word prefer, so we'll just underline that. You don't want to do a series of really big, extreme poses. You do want to scatter in some accents and have him hold still for a little while anyway, because otherwise the character just looks like he's flying around too much. So let's keep him in this general pose, but we'll just change the arm a little bit, just so that he does accent on the word prefer, but it's not a huge pose change. The weapon we only have to fire once, and let's create a new layer. Let's call it panel 6. Let's listen to the audio again for a minute.
Only have to fire once.
Okay, so I would anticipate before he says once, because we're going to go into an extreme pose for the word once. So let's antic on panel 6. Now you have to sort of think about the big pose that he's going to go into for once. And I think what I'm going to do is have him really lean forward towards screen right with his arm out. So let's just crouch him down. Now I think I'm going to use his left hand for that gesture so it reads better, so we have a nice silhouette. So let's bring that hand back and let's bring him into a fist. That left hand where he's gesturing, that he's using here to gesture. It's always good to think about your silhouettes as well. So we don't want to have him reach his right arm in front of his body. And let's bring in another storyboard. I'm going to create a new layer for panel 7. And this is where he's going to say once. So we'll put that in the dialogue notes. It's always good to continuously listen to your audio as you're going, just to get a good feel for the acting.
You only have to fire once. That's how Dad did it.
We're going to need him to step forward, just to balance his weight. Now just like I'm creating a line of action through the body here, I'm also thinking about my line of action through the arms as well. So I think I'm going to move this over a little bit, just to give him more space to act. So I'm going to go with the back of the hand, and he's sort of putting his finger up for once.
Once. That's how Dad did it. That's how America does it. And it's worked out pretty well.
We're going to keep him in this pose and just accent it a little bit. So let's go to our next panel. And you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and create another layer for 9. And we'll just do these at the same time. And we'll just go ahead and type those in right away because they're two quick gestures that sort of go back to back. So that's how Dad did it. That's how America does it. And I think really we can just rise him up a little bit for this one. Unbend his knees a little bit and rise at the pelvis. A little accent with the hand, just maybe raise it up a little bit. You can always put a little arrows to indicate what you're intending on doing. And then maybe we can have him point down. That's how America does it. So that's how Dad did it. Little accent up. That's how America does it. Pointing down. Staying in the general same pose, but just doing smaller movements. And it's worked out pretty well so far. That's all we have left, so let's bring another storyboard panel in.
That's how America does it. And it's worked out pretty well so far.
Robert Downey Jr. is such a great actor. He left that pause in there right after he says that's how America does it. And there's a pause there, and it's just great. It's not just great for our purposes here, but it's great acting, and it gives the audience a second to actually think for a minute. And it gives us time to make our character think. So let's bring this last line over here. we're going to put in a little something to fill in that pause. There's an extreme pose here, we have some accents, and then we have more extreme posing here. For the end, I think we can just have him straighten up, maybe cross his arms, and just deliver the last line. So just keep it a little bit more simple. And just sort of embody that arrogant attitude. We'll put an arrow indicating that he straightens up. We'll just have him fold his arms, so we can have him straighten up during that pause, and then deliver the line, and it's worked out pretty well so far. And I think the accent on that dialogue would be on the word pretty, or you can accent him on far. And all I would do for this one is just keep him in that same pose, and just maybe accent the head a little bit. And that's it. That's basically how you can break apart your storyboard into little chunks of texts, really thinking about the acting and how you want your character to pose. Think about your anticipations. Whether it be for an animated short or a demo reel, you can make it as detailed as you like. In a production environment, it really does depend on the director. Sometimes they want a more detailed storyboard. Sometimes something more impressionistic is fine.
They say the best weapon is one you never have to fire. I respectfully disagree. I prefer the weapon you only have to fire once. That's how Dad did it. That's how America does it. And it's worked out pretty well so far.